they don't know anybody's phone number because in their smartphones, they just pull their name up, right? So they've not
Yeah.
memorized the number. But even if they knew the number, they couldn't quite figure out how to make the phone work. When you grew up with these things, it was just kind of funny to watch them. I have a friend, a really good friend who's So you're talking about how young people react to. So I have three grandchildren, and I was over at their house one day, and the little 4-year-old walked up to Alexa and told Alexa to play it a song, play him a song you wanted to hear. And it just struck me as he doesn't realize that didn't always happen, right? He'll never know that you just didn't walk into the kitchen and shout out into the air, play a song, and the song appeared. That's just his world. That's the way he grew up.
That's
I've got a
yeah, digital natives. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he's even more. I mean, you're a digital native. My children are digital natives. They grew up around computers and the internet and the phone. But he grew up around ambient computing, right? I mean, he just grew up thinking you can talk into the air and it'll do what you want. And he'll never know that. I saw this funny YouTube video where Manuel appreciate this. They took a bunch of teenagers and they took a rotary dial telephone, and they put it in a conference room with the teenagers and they asked them to use it. And they couldn't for the life of them. Number one, they don't know anybody's phone number because in their smartphones, they just pull their name up, right? So they've not memorized the number. But even if they knew the number, they couldn't quite figure out how to make the phone work. When you grew up with these things, it was just kind of funny to watch them. I have a really good friend who's a USA Track and Field Hall of Fame official, and he's officiated a couple of Olympic Games. And so we've had some really good conversations about governance. And, the reality is that good governance is essential for a free society. People who excel at the highest level of the Olympics, I mean, they trained on tracks that were certain size, they trained to certain rules, they had coaches that understood the standards. They had referees that understood the standards. They're competing against other people that are competing, in the same set of rules. And so when you have really good governance, then individuals can excel, and if you don't, then you just have anarchy and chaos. And so, I'm leery sometimes of government regulation because I think lots of times government's co-opted by some people who want to accomplish what they want to accomplish. But I also think it's important that there are rules and there are standards, and that'll help everybody, succeed and excel. And then maybe there are standards that aren't government imposed. I mean, they're either industry associations or maybe organizations themselves. I was chairman of an organic grocery store chain one time called Earth Fare. And there's food safety regulations that you got to comply with, right? That, any grocery store's got to do. But then in our case, we had customers who bought organic foods because they wanted to live a healthy lifestyle. And this is 25 years ago. Today you can buy organic groceries in Walmart, but at the time it was a pretty novel thing, especially in the southeastern United States. So we made a brand promise to customers, that we would have these kinds of foods in our store. So there was kind of a government regulation that we had to comply with, right, about safety. And then, we had customers that we delivered a certain, product to them because they felt like it was important. So what I'm trying to say is there was kind of an internal governance that was on top of what we were required to do. And I think you're going to see that same kind of thing happen in, autonomous intelligence. There's going to be some privacy issues the government decides. I think one of the concerns that a lot of people have about social media is, unfortunately, our human nature is we respond to negative things more than positive things. And so you take some of the social media sites and, what they do is they want you to click. They want you to stay engaged. So they feed you this negative stream of stuff because the reality is that's what keeps you on the screen. And, I think when we step back from that, we realize maybe that's not the healthiest in the world for the society. So there's some regulation that needs to be there. Again, privacy issues. And then once you get that kind of, what are you compelled to do? Then the question is, what type of governance do you layer on top of that? And some of that depends on where you get your resources. I mean, What is it your customers are demanding? What is it your shareholders are demanding? And so there's going to be, a lot of diversity in that, just depending on who's providing you the resources to do what you do.
And moving actually into sustainability I see actually the process of digital transformation parallel with the sustainability transformation. And I think the body of legislation coming up now is not so much taking care of the ethical use of AI. However, it leverages AI to create reports that were not possible a couple of years ago about how the companies operate, how the company governance, how solid it is. And it definitely opens the companies more to the scrutiny of the public, of the shareholders, of the stakeholders. Everybody, as you mentioned, employees are also part of the company and are directly affected by the decisions the executives are making. So I think AI has already a positive aspect in how it refocuses the humans on the environment and how to better manage the environment, better manage the planet. You mentioned about
a lot of these data centers that are running these large language models consume a lot of power, consume a lot of electricity, a lot of clean water. So maybe in some ways they're environmentally helpful, but in other ways they're consuming a lot of resources.
You're right, but our brain, it's a 25 watts machine, so there is a lot of room for improvement. I think if we can operate AI at 250 watts or even 2.5 kilowatts, I think we're light years ahead on not using resources. So I
think you're exactly right about that. I mean, Sam Altman's talking about spending $7 trillion on this stuff, and I just think that's the wrong direction. That's just not the way electronics has been the last 100 years, has it? It's gotten more powerful, it's gotten cheaper, it's got less energy intensive, and we're just at the very infancy of autonomous intelligence. And I really think you got to have more elegant solutions. You talked about our brains running on 20, 25 watts. And we're more sophisticated than any digital neural network, deep neural network, right? And so there is a lot of room for much more elegant solutions than what we have right now. You're not going to scale just by throwing more resources at it. I just don't think that's going to happen.
And we have actually one interview, and we talked about skill sets for humans and how the education system has to develop to provide not only cross-functional but trans-functional setting where people can collaborate. Right now we're still, if we go into the education system, we are still prisoners of the models of 1700, the Sorbonne and so on, where we try to take things apart and study them in depth in one field. Well, we talked about Kahneman, and he actually, as I mentioned before already, he received the Nobel Prize in economics for study of the brain and behavioral studies on economics, not for coming up with another equation on consumption or something that economists usually do.
So you're probably you're closer to this than we are, Isabella. How would you transform education?
Yeah, all this topic, I'm really, I really think the first thing first, regardless it's AI or technology or digital transformation, like it's how we position human, like how do we position ourselves in front of these technologies? I think a lot of fears and a lot of like we're lost, these kind of confusions comes from we're not appreciating or aware or well developed our unique human potential, and that's what made us human. And I've seen immense potential out of that, and we developed the artificial intelligence. And I see people who are not afraid of this. It's because of this as well, because they have critical thinking. They can make things happen. A lot of entrepreneurs, and they are able to leverage the tools, which is artificial intelligence, to move forward. So the way how we position us, it's just critical in defining the next step. Then we find out, okay, this is our role, this is their role. Then how can we collaborate, and what can be the model, and what's the framework? But without that, we'll be confused, like, oh, we're competing with AI. They are doing things we can do, or even better. Fundamentally, I doubt that, because we don't know about potential yet. We don't know 90% of our human brain. It's a myth. And artificial intelligence is fundamentally mimicking human brain. And to what level, essentially? How can we say that's more advanced than humans? So things like that, I think it's very critical to bring into the discussion when we talk about how to move forward, and how to educate people, how to build a new system in corporate development, and things like that.
If there's any culture that I've worked with that's resistant to change, though, it's the K through 12 culture. I mean, you mentioned that you were teaching people the way we did 150, 200 years ago. That's exactly right. And really throughout America, we have this top-down model. You know, we have this high stakes testing, and teachers have to teach to the test. And the theory is, if we can cram enough knowledge into a kid's head, they're going to be successful over the course of his or her career. And that's just profoundly wrong. We have no idea what these children are going to need to know 30, 40, 50 years from now when they're, in the peak of their career. But I don't know how to change that. I've done some of that in South Carolina, and it's just painful. I mean, they don't want to change, and they see you as a threat. I mean, if you talk about changing anything, they just absolutely circle the wagons. But I do agree that we got to do different, but I don't know how to do that institutionally.
Sometimes it's not up to humans. The wave is coming. The next generation are like that no matter what. They're not going to accustom to the current system already. So I definitely see this is not entirely up to the current whatever system, authority, or things like that. I really see that the next generation, they are doing their thing without whatever the education is training them.
Yeah, you try spending tax dollars on something other than the existing school system, though, and you'll find out real quick. It's hard to allocate those resources to do anything different. It's just a hostile resistance to it.
I think what they don't teach us in schools and universities is how to learn. They teach us what to learn. This topic, that topic. And reflecting on what Isabella and you had said, John, most of my education was the history of sciences. I spent a lot of time on the physics of the Newtonian kind, and very little, if anything, on the modern physics. And it's amazing. For instance, if you work in silicon, you need actually relativistic physics. You are the physics of the atom. You're no longer, on moving one kilo or 1 pound on a reclining plane, right? And that's what we spend most of the time learning how to solve these kind of problems. It's more like history of science to me. So maybe we should start with what's new and, put the history in 1 or 2 lectures at the end. And, by the way, Newton has said that, but let's teach relativity. Let's teach cosmology, things that are really challenging our brain. And by the way, AI figured it out already.
Well,
yeah,
I don't know if AI is going to figure it out if the data doesn't exist. I mean, I think one of the exciting things.
The answer to relativistic question of physics, we can try it even here. I'm sure you get a reasonable answer, and you don't learn it in the school.
I think one of the exciting things about the James Webb telescope is it looked out into the universe, and it observed a whole lot of things that we didn't expect were going to be there. That's not what we understand. We have this whole new data set now, and we got cosmologists trying to figure out, what is this? It's not what we thought it was. These galaxies appear to be much more mature and much older than they were supposed to be. That's not what was supposed to be there. And so, to me, that's the exciting part of science. In terms of what we're talking about with artificial intelligence, you think about quantum computing, right? And just another inflection point that this is just going to be and it's fascinating when you start to think about how these computers are working. And I'm not an expert. I don't really understand, but I attend a lot of lectures, and it's just fascinating that it's a type of science that doesn't make sense in our day-to-day physical reality, right? That, particles can be intertwined and be on opposite sides of the universe. And so there's something, what that says is there's something about our standard model of physics that's just not quite right yet, right? This shouldn't be.
The point, we were never told this. I was never told this, and I had a very good education in technical terms. And we're never told that the things we are learning are things of the past, and actually, as you said, there are connect them back with our model. There are actually model about there is the physics explaining what we observe in our physical 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional world. If you start to talk about time, for instance, as a dimension, you move to a different physics. We always use time as a constant, not as a variable.
So in the back part of the book, we talk about universal principles that you can use to manage change. And one of those is defining what's essential. So, the leader has to do that. What's the mission of this organization? And that's usually determined by who's giving you resources, right? What do the shareholders want? What do customers want? That usually drives the organization. Then you got to put together a team of people, to accomplish that mission. Most talented people you can. Everybody has to be on board with that. If somebody's not on board with the mission, it doesn't mean they're a bad person, but they can't be on this team this day. And that can be some really hard decisions, right? That, hey, I love you, man, but you're just not with us. You got to make sure those folks have the resources they need. That's another, responsibility of the leader. You got to make sure that they know how they're accountable. How do we know? How do we measure progress? How do we know that we're making success and accomplishing our mission? But then once you have, a clear mission, a great team, sufficient resources, and everybody knows how they're accountable, get out of their way and let them do their job. Let talented, creative people do what only they can do. And my personal experience is oftentimes you'll get ideas that you could have never in a million years done a whiteboard and come up with, and some of it is, being in touch with customers early. Customers will tell you what the problem is. They may not know what the solution is, but they're expert in their problem, right? And I don't know how many times I've sat down in front of a customer with what I thought was a pretty good idea, and they said, "Well, that's just not really a problem I have." And on contact, plans change, right? So
Absolutely.
getting customers in this loop as quickly as possible, I think, is essential. But that concept of how do you learn to learn? How do you have the process that learn something you don't know? It's essential. And you're right about education. It's not really how we train kids. And it's really not people how an operationally excellent organizations are wired either. So, but when you have a big transformational change like, AI is going to be, the people that can adapt and change and evolve, those are going to be the big winners. Those are the fortunes that are going to be created the next few
Now you're in
decades.
the entrepreneurial world, so you definitely can see how those people are working in this case. That's what I mentioned earlier about the difference between the people who embrace this versus scared of the replacement of it, right?
I'll also give you an example from the education system. Most professors, most educators are scared of students using AI to cheat. And I found, I think it was the Booth School in Chicago, one professor said, I'm actually asking the students to use AI, and then I'm asking them to comment, to research on the AI and give their opinion about what the AI is saying. So instead of saying AI is helping students to cheat. It's actually helping students to think independently.
Right.
I thought it's a great idea. I don't know why it's not implemented. It should be implemented in all universities. It's like, yeah, go and use AI, because I can tell you as an instructor at Cornell, I don't know if a student picked up an answer from AI or not. I actually personally don't care. I care if the student understood what the AI told him or her. And that's the essence of learning. Okay. Did she learn something?
I use ChatGPT and Google Gemini pretty extensively in writing the book. That freaks some people out. And it's like, I made sure that the words were mine to the extent that I could, but I used them pretty extensively. And in some of one great example is I was VP of strategy for Kemet. I was a point person on Wall Street, and the story that I'd always heard was there was an insecticide plant in Bhopal, India that blew up, and Union Carbide went bankrupt. And when they did, they spun off a lot of non-chemical related businesses, and one of those was Kemet. And the management team had bought it, 15 years before I got there. And that's the story I'd always heard. So I write this little story about Kemet for the book, put it in, I think it was ChatGPT, and it comes back and it said, Union Carbide didn't go bankrupt. It got restructured, but it never really went bankrupt. And I thought, well, that's not right. And so then I started going and Googling and researching it. And you know what? It never did go bankrupt. It was restructured. And there's a great example of where we worry so much about it being wrong. There was actually an example where it was right, and I just was misinformed. I was researching, this famous story of Jeff Bezos driving from Boston to Seattle, and writing the business plan for Amazon. And when he first got there and opened an office, his desk was this old door, right? He went up to like Home Depot and got this door and sawhorses, and that was his. And he's a, he's a investment banker. He had the money to buy a desk if he wanted to. That's just a statement. And I knew that, but I'd forgotten it, And one of them kind of reminded me of that little flourish, which is just kind of fun and interesting, about Bezos. And so, I got a whole lot out. The other thing that I did was I would write something and I would put it in ChatGPT and Google Gemini and see if they gave me the same answer, and, is it accurate? And they'd come back and they'd say, yeah, what you said is accurate. Sometimes they'd come back and say, well, it's okay, but here's some things you might think about, and then you go do a little bit more research. So I didn't actually cut and paste what it gave me, but I used it pretty extensively in thinking through what I was doing and making sure it was accurate and, things like that. And to me, that's kind of the best practices of it. We ought to be teaching students to do that, quite frankly, because it's the world they're going to live in, right?
Yeah,
actually, Isabella and I are also looking at sometimes at other futurists, Yuval Harari, his history of the future, if I can use this kind of paradigm. And he talks a lot about AI lately. Actually, he started to talk about the bionic, the changes, the bionics, and
oh, we're just all going to become cyborgs, aren't we?
Everyone is talking about AI.
That's coming.
Well, we already partially, we have limbs and so on, and but hopefully not be the Hollywood model of cyborg, right?
Oh, I don't know. I think that's coming. My grandchildren, my great grandchildren, just going to be cyborgs. It's just
humanity. I think we're special. So
I don't know.
there's always different discussions. So
we survived.
I think the history of science for the last several millennia is human beings are less and less and less close to the center of the universe as we go.
Well,
the more we learn, the more on the periphery we become.
But there is one reflection there, right? The first time somebody told us that Galileo and Jordan Bruno, they burned Jordan Bruno on stakes, right? They couldn't accept the truth. and that was the human reaction to learning something different. I think we have, we're running out of time this time. We definitely
All
want
right.
to.
Well, good. Well,
One
thank
more
you for doing this.
welcome. There is one more question. I'll turn it back to Isabella, and we talked already a little bit about education.
Okay.
So
Yeah, we talk about a lot about younger children, your grandchildren, next generation students. What's your advice, John, to them in the future seeking their career, making their career decisions, and if they want to get into the sustainability, the future of work development, to these young folks who works in IT, how do they navigate forward in general?
So, I think we have talked about some of it, and I think you want to focus on the creative side of professions, the side that requires human empathy, connections with other human beings. That's what humans are going to excel at for the foreseeable future. You want to avoid things that are rote. I don't know that coding's long for this world. So if you want to get into IT industry, I don't know that I would spend a lot of time learning to be a, proficient expert coder anyway. You probably need to know a little something, but it's going to be the creative side of it that's going to be more valuable in the future. I mean, you're going to use, AI to actually produce the code for what you're doing. So, you want to look for those things where, it's more about imagination. It's more about creativity. It's more about relationships and connections to human beings, and less about things that can be automated. If it's something that I told this young banker, if your job requires a checklist, it's not long for this world. That'll be going pretty quick. So
Good. I love the imagination and the creative part, which I think is the beauty of our human spirit. So thank you. Thank you for lighting that up for us and for the younger generations to keep in mind. And thank you so much, John, for sharing about your book and your work. And we'll definitely do a separate one just about the book, because I think there's so much to elaborate in each chapters.
well,
And
I think doing it together would be fun.
yeah, we'll do a debate or something even.
Let's talk about both of them. Yeah.
I'll,
Love it.
I'll try to be the moderator.
All right.
Although
That sounds fun.
Love
Okay.
it. Well, let me end this properly. We have an official ending for every episode. Thank you, John, and thanks to our audience for tuning in. Make sure to join us every week for a new episode of AKFI's Actionable ESG Talk series, where you can gain new perspective, learn how to mitigate risk, and create value by integrating ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. So until next one, goodbye for now. Bye, John. Bye, Manuel.
Bye-bye.
bye. Goodbye, Isabella. Thank you, John. Goodbye.